Commissioner for Mecklenburg, and I will now call this meeting to order. It's great to be with you all this evening. We've got a full agenda of both informational and action items. Before we dive in, I'd like to remind us that our meetings are broadcast live on CATS.
She handles stuff. She's made me like.
I think someone needs to go on mute, maybe?
Well, my grandmother, because like we want to keep pork and chicken for tacos, and my grandma wants to do chicken feet. I'm like, wow.
Okay, thank you. I think we're good now. We're being broadcast live on CATS YouTube, Facebook, and also Gov channel. So hello to all of us who are joining us this evening through those platforms. Okay, at this time, I will take roll call. Vi Lyles, City of Charlotte Mayor.
Present.
Woody Washam, Town of Cornelius Mayor.
Present.
Rusty Knox, Town of Davidson Mayor.
Present.
Melinda Bales, Town of Huntersville Mayor. Anthony Roberts, Manager. All right.
Evening, LJ.
Oh, sorry? Is that Mr. Roberts on the line for Huntersville? Okay, moving on.
Hello, sir.
I'm sorry, who is that on the line?
Just checking. Somebody can hear me.
Couldn't tell. Okay. Yes. Just want to recognize that Mayor Bales of Huntersville is now in the room with us. Welcome. Okay, MTC Vice Chairman John Higdon.
Here.
Mayor of Matthews. Mayor Brad Simmons of Mint Hill, or his alternate. Mayor of Pineville, Jack Edwards, or his alternate. Okay, and then online or on remote, if you are on the call or in the room, I will call the Mayor of Mooresville, Miles Atkins, or his alternate. The Mayor of Gastonia, Walker Reed, or his alternate. Mayor of the City of Monroe, Marion Holloway. Welcome. Let's see, do we have a representative from CTAG? Okay, representative from TSAC.
Chrissy Excellence here.
Welcome. Mayor of Concord, or his alternate. Mayor of Indian Trail, David Cohn, or his alternate. Mayor of Stallings, Wyatt Dunn, or his alternate. Mayor of City of Rock Hill, John Geddes, or his alternate. Okay, thank you. Do we have a quorum?
We do, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, the minutes are found under the first tab of your briefing booklet. Is there a motion to approve the July 27th, 2022 minutes?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? I will take a voice vote on this item. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes. Moving on to the Chief Executive Officer's report. That agenda item was posted for our meeting. Had the CEO report as the last item, but we are going to move it forward. And Mr. Lewis, if you would like to provide that now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, members of the MTC, those in the room and participating virtually. I'll begin my report tonight. As board members are aware, CATS reduced transit service frequency on bus and rail on August 15th due to persistent call-outs and continued open positions that reduced our ability to provide reliable daily service. Our goal in recommending this option was to bring service levels more in line with available manpower levels to provide more reliable, albeit reduced service to our customers. This action also supports our safety goals by lowering our reliance upon excessive overtime, requiring employees to work on their days off, and utilizing supervisory staff to plug holes in our service. While these tools are effective short-term solutions to our service issues, they can result in long-term wear and tear on operations staff if utilized too often or too long. To provide some context to the impact of our service changes, During the week of August 8th through the 14th, the week prior to our service changes, we missed an average of 387 trips per day out of 3,407 daily scheduled trips. That's a little over 10% of our scheduled service levels, and was obviously reached a critical mass where customers began to question our ability to provide daily service. Weekends were even worse, with our average of missed trips were 668 trips on Saturday, and on Saturday and Sunday, which resulted in almost 23% of our total trips missed. Now let's compare that to the week of August 15th, after the service level changes. During last week, we missed an average of 11 trips per weekday out of 2,998 scheduled trips, for less than a 0.05 service interruption missed trip level. Saturday was a bit of a challenge last Saturday with 154 missed trips out of 2,777, although that's still a significant reduction over the previous Saturday, where there were 794 missed trips. I'm confident that the decision this board made to reduce service in line with available manpower will continue to provide our customers the levels of reliability that they've grown to expect from CATS over the years, while we continue to address open positions and the rampant absenteeism. Now I'll move on to our labor negotiations. As you know, our contractor, RAPT Dev, and our SMART union have been engaged in ongoing contract negotiations since June of this year. Since our last meeting, the two sides have reached an impasse in their negotiations and have engaged a mediator and have extended the current labor contract for 30 additional days. They have been meeting for the last 2 weeks with the mediator and have made very good progress. They started the mediation with a number of outstanding issues in the teens. They're now down to single digits, and I'm confident that in the next several days to weeks, we're hopeful they will reach a final decision. Once an agreement is reached, I'm confident we can begin to address the manpower shortages directly and move towards a lasting and sustainable solution to our operational challenges. Now, in board members' board packet for this month, you will notice in Section 2 a new section in your board packet that is our safety performance report. We have begun including this information in your packet as a part of our federal agency safety plan requirements. You will notice our performance metrics for safety in each of our operating divisions for fatalities, preventable collisions, reportable injuries, and system reliability incidents or mechanical failures. We've been tracking this data since the beginning of this year and now feel we have enough data to begin trend analysis in any one of these areas that may begin to show a negative trend. This will continue to be part of your monthly packet, and I will report and address any negative trends that may occur during my future CEO reports. If there are no questions, Madam Chair, that concludes my CEO report for the day.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Are there any questions? Hearing none, we will move on to a report from Transit Service Advisory Committee, Chairwoman Chrissy Exlin.
Thank you, Commissioner Altman and members of the MTC. In our August TSEC meeting, we heard public comment from 3 young people, including a teenager, who urged CATS to provide better pay and working conditions for bus drivers so that we can restore the service so many people depend on and as a more sustainable transportation choice. On our TSAC agenda, we first got an update on the temporary service modifications that were due to go into effect a few days after we met. We heard about the outreach CATS had done to get the word out to riders. They reported, some of the things they reported to us were that they had some feedback from express bus riders who were asking for midday or earlier afternoon trips because, you know, the 9 to 5 schedules that were so normal before COVID are maybe changing, and that would be helpful. CATS also told us that riders prefer giving feedback in the morning because in the afternoon they just want to go home and don't want to talk. We also heard about how the hiring of more bus operators is going. I think there had been a new class of operators that had just started that week. There was a hiring event scheduled for this past week. And we were advised that CATS will wait until they have like enough new drivers to begin adding more service, to make sure like the new drivers stay on and you don't add service and then have to take it away if people decide it isn't a stop for them. We also got an overview of the before and after origin and destination study that CATS is conducting with a vendor. We look forward to hearing the results from that, which can help CATS better design service to meet riders' needs. And we also heard that the findings of that study will be useful to help devise a fare capping strategy, which is something TSAC has been advocating for a long time, and that we were pleased to hear Mr. Lewis announce at a MTC meeting earlier this year. We also had an update on the red line design update that we heard here at MTC last month, and we met a couple of new staff members at CATS who will be working on bus planning and stops. The last item is that we discussed how TSAC will be holding our meetings going forward. You know, we had, and I know that that's on the agenda for later, we met in person for the first time since pre-COVID. A lot of TSAC members weren't able to attend for various reasons. Among those, you know, I think somebody, you know, had COVID. There's people whose commuting patterns have changed. It would be really beneficial for TSAC to be able to continue to hold hybrid meetings. Otherwise, we may, you know, see greater turnover. There may be some people that don't work in Uptown anymore, and it's a significant burden to come here for meetings. My understanding from CATS Legal was that if our votes on TSAC are not considered binding and are advisory, that would be okay for us to vote, and if I'm misstating this, please correct me, but because our votes are advisory to MTC and CATS and not binding votes, that it would be okay to continue having hybrid meetings, but we would look to MTC for guidance on that. So that concludes my remarks. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your leadership in the work of TSAC. It's incredibly important. I understand from Mr. Lewis that the lawyer will be giving us some more input on the legal question you just raised later on the meeting today.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for Ms. Exlin? Hearing none. Okay, so we would have a report from the chair of Citizens Transit Advisory Group, but they did not meet this month, so there is nothing to report out. So at this time, we will take public comments, and I do believe we have 2 people signed up to speak. If that is correct, Mr. Ford?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. We will begin with Steve Yaffe. I think go up there. Okay, so you have 2 minutes for your comments.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak against the idea of an uptown transit center. To be blunt, that idea is so 1970s, when uptown was the major destination for work trips. But Charlotte is now multi-nucleated, with major developments near uptown in South Park, South End, and soon NODA. I'm ignoring the more peripheral activity centers in Ballantyne and University City. Investing a huge amount of money into an uptown transit center, regardless of whether it's below ground or at grade, doesn't make sense. CATS is moving beyond a radial network. Why would you expect riders who don't live or work in uptown to sit through congestion in order to transfer in uptown? I want you to visualize a big diamond. The blue line traverses the diamond through the top and bottom points. The side points would be connected by the silver line and initially the gold line. Those are the major radial routes. And there's other radial routes, radial bus routes with frequent service that are coming, could still touch a diamond, one of the diamond transit hubs before going uptown. But other routes would circumvent uptown by touching all 4 points on the diamond. Each route in the vicinity would have layover time built at one of those 4 diamond hubs. Each of those 4 diamond hubs would include bathroom facilities for bus operators, as well as connections to other routes and bike share, of course. So I'm asking you to, I know the money's been approved for planning, But to avoid a major expenditure, avoid building a magnet for pickpockets, avoid the image of discrimination that a transit center offers by sequestering transit riders from view. Instead, support an efficiently functional and equitable transit system. We're looking at hubs. Let's go all the way and make it work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yaffe. And then our next speaker is Yancy Fouché.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'm Yancy Fouché. I'm the Director of Sustainability at Davidson College, and I'm here to advocate strongly in favor of updating the design study for the Red Line. In spring of 2020, right before the pandemic sent our students and everyone else home, we finished about 9 months and published a transportation master plan for campus, our first ever. And the primary objective of that plan was, one of the key objectives was to be a strong advocate for regional transit to the north. And we very much maintain that position even after the pandemic has changed commuting patterns. So we have about 1,900 students on our campus, about 1,000 employees. 50% of our students do not have a car, and many of them come from first-generation families and low socioeconomic backgrounds, and so we see a major equity issue to them being able to move around, including coming to other towns and Charlotte. 32% of our faculty and staff live more than 5 miles south of Davidson and would, really strongly benefit from better access to rail there, to transit. We're interested in better access for visitors to our arts and athletics events, our prospective families that fly into the airport, and would appreciate a better option to get up to us. And finally, we have a new president who just started in the past month and is very interested in community engagement. And so I see our connection to Charlotte being even stronger moving forward, and certainly would be supported by greater transit. We appreciate bus rapid transit as a bridge option. But we, continue to hold the vision for sort of breaking through all the challenges that I know exist around that line and having a more permanent, more visible, and accessible solution that would also drive transit-oriented development. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate our speakers taking the time to come today. At this time, we will move on to our informational items, beginning with Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you, Madam Chair. While Jason is coming to the podium, the first item that he will be addressing is giving the MTC a little bit of background on the need for an updated transportation center. The current transit center is reaching its useful life. Our transit center was opened in the mid-90s. It is an expected useful life, according to federal requirements, of 30 years, and we will reach that in the next couple of years. We have been discussing this internally at the staff level for the last couple of years. What options do we have in order to better the current transit center in line with the new design of our bus system? With Envision My Ride, we are decentralizing our routes. We are moving towards more hubs, but at the end of the day, Uptown Charlotte remains the major destination for the majority of riders. And so even though we are decentralizing, having more hubs as outlined in our bus priorities study and Envision My Ride, there's still a need to have some level of transfer activity in Uptown. Our plan is to have 2 transit centers, one at Gateway Station and one at in the vicinity of the transit center, since the proximity of that property to the Gold Line and the Blue Line still is a critical importance to us. At the time, as we were going, we had 2 options: either to renovate the current facility, which would have been very difficult in that we still needed to operate out of the facility, or find a new location to build. As we were doing a lot of planning for the Republican National Convention, we started looking for available property to relocate activity during the convention. And that was a very, very difficult prospect for us. We could not find a suitable, available location anywhere within the uptown area. And so this unsolicited proposal, which Jason will describe, really allowed us to think very differently about how we would address this problem. And I'll let Jason get into the details of that in his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Madam Chair and Board. And, you know, John mentioned the RNC, but when the DNC was here, we were able to find a relocated space for a transit center, but that's now a park and a ball field and surrounded by apartment high-rises. So in just 10 years, the amount of opportunity for land has changed very quickly in uptown Charlotte. So certainly challenging to find space for a transit center. And, all right, Paulus, I might have to, oh. Okay. So just to zoom out a little bit, you know, as John mentioned, the transit centers that were in discussion on the top half of the map here, that star is the Charlotte Gateway Station. In the center of the map, the Charlotte Transit Center. And you can see with the currently adopted plan that we have, the CityLink's gold line there in yellow, the blue line in blue, of course, and the silver line in purple, and the red line in red, all hit those opportunities for transfer. And what's not shown is all the bus routes that come into that area. And as we look to decentralize the bus network, as John mentioned, there will be a need for mobility hubs, for restroom and break room facilities outside of uptown. But there's no place within this region where you have the greatest concentration of employment within just a handful of blocks. And that will continue to be the case for many years to come. The Charlotte Gateway Station area indicated on the policy, you might just have to hit this is right there, thanks. The purple lines here is the silver line, the red and the gold, all converge at the Charlotte Gateway Station area. There is currently a public-private partnership in place here with those yellow blocks indicated, where a new multimodal center will be created with bus and with rail facilities as well as Amtrak instead of a mixed-use development. But back many years ago, in the 1960s, there was a train station there. The original train station in uptown Charlotte survived until the grade separations occurred for all the rail tracks that go through that part of uptown. And currently on the right is our current Amtrak facility. And this is the busiest Amtrak facility up and down that corridor that runs between Charlotte and Raleigh out of all the stations that are there. This project would replace the Charlotte Amtrak station and would be relocated to uptown Charlotte. So at the Charlotte Gateway Station, we'll have a multimodal transit hub and destination center and connections to Amtrak and bus service, Link's Silver Line, Link's Red Line, and the CityLink's Gold Line. The construction that you see there today is the tracks to enable the station to come to downtown, and that broke ground in 2018, and that will be wrapping up this year. But phase 2 will be that public-private development partnership where the station will be built and accommodations for all the transit facilities that I mentioned. So the Charlotte Gateway Station has some history, so does the Charlotte Transportation Center. This is, I think, somewhere around the 1980s where we had the Charlotte Transit system that had their customer service center along North Tryon. And then the main transfer hub at the time was located, next slide, was located at the Square of Trade and Tryon. That's where all the buses, it was open air, it was incorporated with the Tryon Street Mall that was there at the time, and all transfers happened in an open air facility. And so in partnership at that time with Nations Bank, that later became Bank of America, of course, a new state-of-the-art at the time transit center was built to bring all that transfer under one roof and also had retail where people could potentially pay bills. There was like some shopping and restaurants, of course. But the world has changed around the Charlotte Transportation Center. And next slide. Thank you, Paulus. So just another aerial shot of that, the Charlotte Transportation Center and the empty blocks around that, and the gold line and the blue line. Next slide. But CTC has certainly seen a lot. If you go all the way back to 1995, that was the Charlotte Panthers' first season. It's seen the Charlotte Trolley, the opening of the Link's Blue Line, 2 phases of the CityLink's Gold Line, the extension of the Blue Line, the Hornets here off of Tyvola, the Bobcats, the Hornets, Charlotte Knights coming back to uptown Charlotte, football club now. But I think what's really important is to think about where we were as a population, as an economic center in 1995. We primarily served just the city of Charlotte at that time with square miles of 212 population just under 500,000, but today CATS with the half-cent sales tax serves the majority of Mecklenburg County and regional services to Union, Gaston, and York counties in South Carolina. And we have a service area population of 1.3 million and 675 square miles. So the transit center of 1995 has weathered a lot of changes and has served us well, but to John's point, it is not the transit center that we need at this point in time to meet the needs of the future. Next slide. And mobility expectations and needs have changed very publicly. It served us for almost 30 years, but think about all that's changed on the technology side, smartphones and the integration with technology and mobility on demand. That landscape is changed rapidly and continues to change. And across the country, transit agencies are looking to increase convenience, reliability, and frequency of services, and we've taken that on through our Envision My Ride effort, 2030 plan. And we really, truly believe that for us to fully implement those plans, realistically, to meet those mobility needs, that the region and Charlotte need a transit hub that can meet the present and also be future ready. Next slide. So with that, as John mentioned, we were approached with an unsolicited proposal to redevelop the transit center. And following that, we issued a request for proposals in June of 2019. And then through that process, the joint venture partnership of Charlotte-based White Point Partners and Dart Interests, the Dallas real estate investment firm, was selected out of 3 groups that submitted proposals. And was very enticing about that proposal, next slide, that development partnership owned land across the street on 4th Street. That's what's indicated there by WPTB Brevard LLC, and then, of course, the CATS Transit Center on the right-hand side. Where this will be beneficial to us is, as John mentioned, that we will need to have a temporary transit center during this time period. And so with this property available as a part of the joint development partnership, we would be able to have a temporary transit center while the permanent transit facility is being constructed with the mixed-use development. Next slide. So that mixed-use development, the blue line there on the right-hand side of the screen, the gold line just below its street level, the transit center will be integrated within a mixed-use development with commercial and hotel possibilities. Next slide. And it will require, as I mentioned before, a temporary transit center during construction. Here's an image of what some of the concourse could look like with that facility. Next slide. And we did, to help with the funding of this project, CATS submitted a RAISE grant in 2021, and we were awarded $15 million towards the public-private development. Next slide. We believe the project benefits will have an improved passenger experience. I think we can all agree if the transit center today does not necessarily meet the needs of our growing community, it is potential to include charging infrastructure. If we look ahead to this facility being built, we're already doing the transition to electric vehicles. The ability to include that within this facility would be something we can do from the ground up, and it's completely consistent with our Envision My Ride goal of a decentralized bus network. Next slide. Next steps for us will be a fall/winter 2022-2023 public engagement to communicate about the public about what they'd like to see in this facility, and also to communicate the changes that will have to be implemented in order to realize the temporary transit center. We will have to do a service equity analysis as also a part of this process, and there will be ongoing and future meetings and conversations with this body as well as with Charlotte City Council. And of course, since this is a federally funded project in part, we will be doing a lot of coordination with the Federal Transit Administration. Next slide, and I think that's my last one. I can take any questions.
Jason, I'm glad you addressed the charging station potential. I guess a larger question is, as we move towards the zero carbon footprint in the future, these charging stations that we're talking about are not the same charging stations you're going to use for a Tesla or anything else, because you've got large buses with large battery packs and everything else. Are we making arrangements now for the bus garage example, or even at our park and rides to the north and other park and rides on the periphery where there are charging stations available besides just this location?
So the technology is changing so rapidly. You know, in 8 years, it's changed already so much. It's continuing to change. But I think to answer your question about what we'll include at our facilities and park and rides, we'll be starting a zero emissions transition plan this year, which will help us answer those questions, not only for the number of vehicles that we need, the charging infrastructure, but how do we update our facilities to accommodate that? What kind of space needs are we going to have? What kind of retrofitting opportunities do we see? So yes, I think through that zero emission transition plan, we'll be able to answer lots of those questions.
Mayor Laus?
I know that our Charlotte has 5 employment centers where we see masses of people coming to work. I'm sure that the northern and southern towns can identify those areas within. So I think the suggestion around the idea of diamonds versus hubs versus where do you go specifically, I'd like to actually ask you to explain better for me the difference between diamonds and hubs and why you would have this major location in Center City that's, could be a question. And then I want to follow up after on to make another comment. So could you or Mr. Lewis talk about this?
Jason, you want to go back to the map of Uptown area? And I think you can elaborate on your
Sure.
discussion.
And while Paulus is pulling that up, I mean, certainly, if you go back to when the center was built, there wasn't a great concentration in South Park or Valentine and other places. Certain Research Park, I think, was there in its early stages. But I think that what we're trying to achieve here, when you look at the concentration of transit investment, and that just today, think about the Blue Line extension, and City Links Gold Line, in some instances, one of the single greatest concentration of federal investment in a single block in probably the southeast, and think about the frequency that's going to be there. And our city, although it is improving in crosstown roads and routes, it still has a lot of ways to go with that. So we still believe that there still needs to be some level of a hub at this single point of investment. And so maybe not at the 22 bays that we have here today, but some level of bays here for bus routes, so 10, 12, or 14 bays. So a smaller, more compact, nimble system versus the very large bay structure that we have here. What would be paired with this would be those hubs at, say, South Park, Eastland, the airport. And we've made some good strides in that because we have transit centers currently at South Park and Eastland, and all of our park and rides can function as hubs. 26 stations on the Blue Line all can operate as hubs. So we have a lot of the infrastructure in place now to do that decentralization.
So I think it's very helpful sometimes to see this vision because our Center City plan is really built around the idea of keeping people in the Center City as employment centers. And I know that there's been changes in work pattern, but I think when you look at what the Gateway is and the entertainment district that we're talking about from Trade Street all the way down to Moorhead, and maybe a little bit beyond. These are important areas to bring groups of people together. So I understand we need both small and large, but I don't think we should give up the large if that's what I'm hearing you suggest, that we need a way to get people on the blue, the silver line en masse. So am I saying that correctly?
That's correct. And I think what's not shown here is, that we do have the opportunity to create bus routes that just travel through Uptown, and they just are stopping by the transit center. So they are another kind of through type of service like the Blue Line, but the Uptown area will always be a critical place for employment and recreation, entertainment across the region.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Excellent. Well, thank you so much for this redevelopment update. This was just for our information. So we will now move on to our next item, which concerns service changes updates.
Thank you. And John covered a lot of this in detail, and I'll go over some of the highlights, and I'm excited to also talk about the microtransit update to this board, and we'll have more information on that, of course, as we go throughout the fall. Next slide. So just a kind of refresher of how we got to this point. In June, Mr. Lewis detailed the issues that were facing us on the operator space and our impact to our ability to provide service. We developed a ridership-based methodology to adjust the bus and rail schedules to improve reliability. We went to the TSAC board to approve that methodology to modify the schedules, and in July of this year, you all, this board, approved those temporary service modifications. Next slide. Next, thanks, Paul. So to communicate those changes, we did a lot of public outreach, and we went to, before the service started, we went at 5:30 a.m. in the morning at those park and rides up and down the corridor and talked directly with customers boarding the bus, showing them the new schedules, talking about the change. We did pop-ups also at the Charlotte Transportation Center at 2 times. And then we did virtual public meetings twice, 12 p.m. and 6 p.m. on August 4th. And then on opening day, we went to Davidson, Cornelius, and Huntersville to communicate those changes, make sure people knew that this was a day of the change, and make sure that they knew this would be the change going forward until our operating situation improves. And out the entire week, from 7:30 a.m. to 3 p.m., our staff was at the Charlotte Transportation Center to communicate those changes and answer any questions that the public would have. Next slide. So at those public meetings, we had great participation, and we talked to a great deal of people. You can see there the numbers on the slide, and at the CTC, an overwhelming response of people. And this was just in those 3 days, we did that engagement to the CTC and then a virtual meeting with 89 views. Next slide. So just a summary, we implemented those changes on August 15th to just 20% of our local and express route, 80% of our routes, there was no change. And that was August 13th for the Lynx Blue Line, going from 15 minutes to 20 minutes, and August 15th for bus. This has seen the improvement to provide a consistent, reliable schedule, as Mr. Lewis detailed. And as the operator availability improves, we'll use that same ridership-based methodology to add service, add frequency back in. And as Mr. Lewis detailed, we have seen great improvements in the decrease in missed trips throughout our system, and we are continuing to monitor this on a daily basis. Next slide. So, microtransit is something that can also help us in this time of need. Finding ways to be more creative about the service that we put out each and every day, but also looking to new technology and best practices that we're seeing for transit agencies across the country and the globe as well. Next slide. And this was adopted by this body in May of 2022 as a part of the Envision My Ride Bus Priority Study, looking at improving time by 23 high-frequency bus routes, enhancing the experience by bus stop improvements, mobility hubs across the county, but also microtransit zones, looking at places across our service area where we say have greater than 30-minute service, 60-minute service. How can we better serve those community with more on-demand, more flexible service communicated with our app? And that's what I'll focus on now, is that highlighted bullet there, first, last mile, and on-demand solutions. Next slide. Timed very well. We did, during the process of the planning effort for this Envision My Ride effort, we went and applied for route restoration funds with the FTA, and we were awarded this summer $750,000 to develop microtransit implementation strategies. So it's timed very well. And through that grant, we will do continued public involvement. We'll do more equity-based mapping, looking at how we integrate more into technology, fleet planning. What is the fleet of the future for CATS if we look at more on-demand service? What size vehicles do we need? What is that service plan for on-demand and for first, last mile? And also, what can we do at mobility hubs for those electrification? Do we need what's called opportunity charging at mobility hubs to help with the electrification of our fleet? Next slide. So we'll implement this in 2 phases, and I'm happy to report that we have found a path to do this faster than we had anticipated. And so we will, out of all the zones, we don't feel like we can do all zones at this time, but we're going to focus on 5 initial zones on our first, last mile proposal to look at the university area, Hidden Valley community, the Camp North End area, Druid Hills community, down south at the Pine Valley neighborhood area and Carolina Place Mall and parts of Pineville, and then the airport area. And I would like just to make a note for the city of Charlotte purposes, 3 of those zones, the Camp North End, Hidden Valley, and the airport area encompass our corridors of opportunity geographies, and they'll be coordinated with those capital projects as well. And what we'll do with this first last mile, we'll work with our app, with the trip planning function, so you can plan your trip with ride sharing and transportation companies. And as we finalize all the details of that, we can get into more conversation about the companies that will be involved with that. That's the map on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we worked with our app developer, the CATS Pass app, to identify half-mile buffers for all of our local routes, all of our local fixed routes. And so if we have a day, we hope that with our service strategies, that we won't have missed and canceled trips. But if we get to that point again, with this half-mile buffer, we can activate zones around routes to enable our customers to use first, last mile strategies to complete their trip. And that can be turned on very quickly and turned off quickly as needed. So we've got that embedded within the app, and we're still working out all the details. But if all goes well with the conversations with the app developer to integrate this technology with our service profile, we hope to implement this later this year. And this will not be a replacement. This is a supplement to our services. Phase 2 of our microtransit rollout is to look what we call a conversion of services. So think about routes that are maybe 60 minutes or greater than 30 minutes. And the example I have here on the screen is the Village Rider services. So Route 97, Route 98, and Route 99. Also Route 290, which is a Davidson shuttle. Not a Village Rider, but it is a local route that serves the community of Davidson. These routes already today provide deviated service, so somebody can call for a ride within 3/4 of a mile of that fixed route today. So they're already doing some of that on-demand service, but it's a day in advance, and we have to go out and check the roads and make sure the bus can traverse those turns. And so this fall, we want to advance this area as one of our first pilot implementations of on-demand service with a third-party provider, not completely with first last mile with, say, a rideshare company, but with smaller on-demand type of shuttle vehicles that can be more live on-demand type of services that'll use our park and rides that are already in this place as starting and ending points, and we'll be doing public involvement to the community to further define this zone. Let's make sure we got the right zone or there are locations that we're missing. And I want to make sure that make this point very clear that this is, from a service strategy standpoint, is not to replace the service with hours. This would be an expansion of service hours, and we would take those fixed route savings for those routes and the buses and operators, fold that back into the system as frequency to also help us with on our operator side and furthering the goals of the Envision My Ride, a more frequent service. So just because no reduction in fixed route bus hours would be a part of this proposal. We'll kick this off this fall with engagement with Huntersville, Cornelius, and Davidson. There will be required a service and fare equity analysis that we'll bring back to this board for approval. And if we're able to work out the technology and get the right zone in place that the community desires, we're looking to a 2023 implementation. Next slide. So at the end of the day, and maybe Paul, let's just click through some of these. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is build a connected network of frequent transit that's connected to trails and greenways, also connecting to driving and ride trips, walking trips, and bike and scooter shares. And so microtransit, the Envision My Ride effort, even going back to the Charlotte Transportation Center, are all part of that connected network to get to the mobility needs of the future. Thank you, and I think with that's my last slide, and I'll take any questions.
Mayor Higdon?
Thank you, Jason. Could you explain a little more about the half-mile buffer study? Is that the actual buses are going to go an extra half mile, or will it be a microtransit component?
Yeah, sorry, it should be, thank you, Mary, for to clarify that. So what we did, we took a half mile from each route, so a mile all the way across. And so if we have operator challenges on any given day on a certain route, we can activate that route for a ride sharing or other transportation companies to help fulfill that trip. And so that would take you within that zone to just like if you were taking that bus route. So it wouldn't be the bus, it would be a kind of third-party provider communicated and trip planned through the app.
Great, thank you.
Correct.
Anybody else?
Yes. Jason, last month when we talked about the temporary service modification, I expressed concern that I didn't feel that CATS did a very good job messaging, and I stand corrected. What I've seen in social media, the emails I've gotten, because I do get the thread, the messaging's been there. So kudos to whoever did the messaging about the temporary service changes besides the opportunities that we had at the park and rides. I think the messaging was good, and I think the evidence showed there are less missed rides, and I don't see complaints. I know you guys do, but I haven't heard a lot, which is good.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
No, go ahead.
Oh,
Ms.
I think Mr. Thunberg, and then I'll get to you. Mr. Thunberg.
I'm sorry about that. I actually didn't have a question. That was from earlier when we couldn't hear John's report.
Thank you. Mayor Bales.
You have to get the minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence, I just want to also say thank you for working with our staffs to make sure that our communities were able to push the information out. I think working together and making sure that we're over-communicating, I think in this particular instance, it was a huge win. I hope that we'll continue to do that, because I think all of our citizens deserve the ability to be able to know what's happening and to be able to know when they can catch that bus and when not. So thank you for the extra outreach that you've done. Greatly appreciated. In regards to the microtransit implementation, I'm excited to hear the Village Rider is being looked at. I continue to get calls from residents in Huntersville asking how they can utilize the service. So I'd love to be able to sit down and become a little bit more adept at how it works so that I can also communicate that. Because when I'm talking to some, 70, 77-year-old folks who are living in an assisted living who got rid of their car and then went, I can't get to where I need to go. I need to be able to help them navigate that. But I think these options that we're discussing now, I think that you will see a lot more ridership on the Village Rider if we can implement some of these on-demand solutions. So I look forward to continuing to see this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Bales. We'll work very closely with every town staff. We had a good conversation with one of Matthew's town staff this morning, and it kind of dawned on me that it would be helpful if each town had, what is kind of our service portfolio? What do we have here? How many stops do we have? How many shelters? What's our frequency? Just kind of a 101. So we'll be working on some documentation to help each town with that.
I would love to see that also, if possible.
Absolutely.
Ms. Exlin.
Thank you. I had a couple questions about, I know the slides are off, but for the pilot zones, for the microtransit, so is that for trips that start and end inside the zones? Would
Yeah.
those be covered only, or?
Yeah, our current proposal is to be just within that zone.
To start and end inside
Yeah.
each zone. And just to be super clear, so when I think of microtransit, well, I was thinking about Lyft and Uber, but is that correct? And does it also include scooters and/or bikes?
At this point, we're focusing on, ride sharing and transportation companies, not the scooter and bike. That would be, some future phase. I think we have some more work to do on that.
Okay. And then the section on the slide that had the reliability coverage within the half-mile buffer when there's severe labor shortages, maybe it's to be determined what's the definition of that. I was thinking about the 17, which runs every 45 minutes, I think. I noticed the other day one was canceled, right? So that's, an hour and a half between buses. So that seems like a long time to wait. So would that theoretically mean someone waiting at CTC for a bus that's not coming for an hour and a half could get a free Uber?
So what we'll do is, I think in future meetings, we'll kind of completely define and refine that so that we can have that as kind of the education package for the community. So that is a good example of a route that is high, low frequency.
If I can add to that, that is the exact
Yeah.
kind of trip that we're looking to provide other solutions for. And so if we miss a trip and we're still refining the exact parameters of it, but that's an example of a circumstance that we want to solve. And so if for any reason we're going to miss a trip, we will be able to push that information out and say, the 10:15 trip, for whatever reason, be it equipment or manpower, is being missed, for the next hour, any one of our customers on that line will be able to, use this app to get a third-party provider that will take them within that zone. We're not going to compete with the TNCs and other trips, but along your normal bus route, we want to solve that issue.
And does that then require it's only customers that are using the app?
I want to make sure it's our customers. I don't know if I can 100% guarantee, but that's one of the reasons we want to push them through our app so at least it's our customers who are used to communicating and receiving information through the app. If we can find a 100% solution, I would jump on that, but I think this is the best answer we have at this time.
Okay,
Mayor
thank you.
Lyles? No, I think Ms. Ashland asked my question.
Anybody else?
Yeah, just one thing to add, going along with what Mayor Bales indicated a minute ago. Well, let me jump back to Rusty's point. I do think our communications at our park and rides, it was way above what we've experienced in the past, so thank you for that. But I think there's a couple groups we need to continue to stay focused on, and that's our senior population. Melinda noted that. You know, I think you communicate with certain groups in different ways, and maybe our lower income areas of our town. I'm not sure that the communication channels are quite the same for a lot of those groups. So, I mean, you can't assume they've got the technology and the equipment to be able to understand that. So I think we need to keep that out front of us as well.
Well, I'll just add, we can certainly work with your staff to identify those populations, and if there's events or kind of meetings that they gather at, I'm a firm believer of going to people rather than have them come to you. So I think we'll certainly talk to your teams about that. And I'll just, a big thanks, I just want to make a note, all the public involvement we did do was like a heavy lift by our marketing and communication team and our service planning team. They were out there each and every day, so really want to thank them.
I'll add too that there's organizations within these special groups, Davidson Village Network and in our town, Smith Coalition, and some organizations like that that can help get the word out. And staff can help you with that as well.
Absolutely.
I think we got to go to them though.
All right, thank you so much for this temporary service modification update. And we will now move on to our action item on the South End Station locally preferred alternative. Ms. Todd, okay, I'm sorry. Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Good evening, thank you, and I'm honored to present South End Station to you tonight. This project, if we go next slide. This project we presented to you at the June meeting for information, and we were beginning our planning activities at that time. And just a little context on the project is that we are planning for a new light rail station about midway between our east-west and New Bern stations within South End. And this area has had an incredible amount of development over the past few years. And there's much more transit demand out there than there was in 2007 when we first built the Blue Line. And this has been identified in the South End Vision Plan as a priority, and so this project is kind of the culmination of a process to try to meet the needs of this area, both transit needs and also there, as you can see, the white dashed circles there are the intersection crossings across the track, and there's about a seven block gap where there's no crossings across our track, where there's just a need for pedestrian and bicycle connectivity crossing as well. So we're going to address both of those with this project. Next slide. So, and we began planning when we've last presented in June, there were two main options, a north and a south option. We've been evaluating those, and we've also gone out to the public to perform stakeholder meetings and public meetings. We've advertised using e-blasts, social media posts, media releases, project webpage is up and running now, and we've worked with Charlotte Center City partners and stakeholders around the project area. And just within the past month, we've held 2 different public meetings, a virtual meeting, and we received 40 different posts and over 200 views on that meeting, which we presented our options and our staff recommendation. And we also followed that up with an in-person open house in South End at the Urban Design Center. And we had about 35 attendees there. And it was, personally, I thought it was a great opportunity for myself and our team to get a chance to talk with some of the same people probably that came to the virtual meeting, but others who are just passing by as well and who had interest in what we were doing. We got a lot of very positive feedback from that. It was very encouraging that we're on the right track for this project. Next slide. So we've gone through quite a few different meetings here. We had held stakeholder meetings with each of the businesses and developments surrounding the project area. We held the first one in May and a second one later on August 1st. We've presented to TSAC, of course, to MTC in June, and we created a staff recommendation that I'll present in just a second of where the best site for this station is. And we presented to the other locations on here too, the other items on here to Transportation Planning Committee and the public meetings. Next slide. So after we looked and evaluated at our north and our south options, we determined that they both had major issues and problems that challenges that were going to be very difficult to overcome. The south option was right next to Spectrum Apartments. It had a lot of impacts to those apartments. We're going to be building right up on them, potentially even having to make improvements and modifications to the building facade itself, and that is really not something that we felt was a good idea to do. It would have been just a great burden to Spectrum Apartments. We also, through our communications, we had the opportunity to speak with representatives from Atherton Lofts, and they had many of the same concerns. This also would have had a lot of impact on them, not directly on their condominium building, but on their parking lot and on the rail trail right adjacent to that. So after we looked at these, we came up with this hybrid option, which is sort of a combination of the two, but also a modification, where we are proposing to have an offset station platform that better fits within the existing rail corridor, so we won't need to buy new right-of-way for the platform or the rail trail, and it has a lot less impacts. And as we presented this to the different stakeholders and to the public, we got a lot of support. We received statements from most of the developments in the area that this is their preferred option, and we also had a lot of good conversations with them about what they wanted to see in this project, and was very encouraging. A lot of that had to do with the reduced impacts to Spectrum Apartments and Atherton Lofts, and also just that it would be just a little simpler construction and less impactful for everybody, including Spectrum and Atherton, but also to the other sites as well. There's a lot less disruption with this option to the existing blue line. We avoid a lot of overhead contact system, OCS, relocations that we were going to have to do with the north option. We also avoid impacting the feeds coming out of a substation, which is the small green box there in the middle of between the two platforms, that we will not have to get into that. And we also, we're working in relatively flat ground, so we don't have a lot of large retaining walls, or the access out here is just a little easier, so we should have less impact to the overall system. Certainly, we will have impact to the overall system during construction, but this is the best way to minimize that. We also impact a lot less of the existing infrastructure outside of the blue line. The drainage system for the whole area in this part of South End all runs through Publix across the tracks to Spectrum Apartments. And with the south option, we would have had to relocate all of that and rebuild it. So we avoid most of those impacts. And also, the section of the rail trail along Atherton Lofts has a lot of decorative, artistic landscaping that would have been taken out if we built a station platform there, and we're able to preserve that and keep that as intact the way it is today. There's a lot better connections, we feel, to the side streets, which is also very important. We want to get people not just from the immediate land uses, but also from elsewhere within South End to this station and from this station. And so the connections are between Spectrum and Hawkins Street condominiums. There's a sidewalk through there. as well as along Publix, and we are going to try to work with those property owners as part of this project to improve those connections and make them feel more a part of the rail trail, and just make it more obvious for the general public how to get to this station, since there are no public streets that lead to it. So, and a part of that will also be looking at better visibility and accessibility to this station. So this will be a very similar station to what we have across the rest of the system, but we'll look at artistic and aesthetic treatments that can make this station stand out and be more visible from the side streets. And we also think that this gives us better access, although it's still a challenge because there's no streets leading directly to the station. This gives us a better chance at having improved access and staging during construction. And all of those factors also help us to have a lower cost than the north or the south option was projected to have. We have not done a full cost estimate for this project. That will happen during design, but we did compare some of the factors that would affect the cost, and this option comes in significantly lower. Next slide. So I'm asking you tonight to adopt the offset option as our locally preferred alternative. That will allow us to advance this further into the FTA's environmental and NEPA process, and we'll also advance this into design and begin designing the station and the rail trail. If there's any questions.
Thank you for that presentation. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Yes. Are there other offset or hybrid stations along the route?
There are not any other offset stations at this time. It's something that we are looking at on other projects, and definitely haven't ruled that out, but this is kind of a unique case because of the limited space out here for a station and the pattern of the development right up against us. That's the main reason why we considered an offset station here.
There's no concerns about building something you've never done before?
Certainly, that's why we didn't start out with this as one of our two options from the very beginning. But after studying it in detail and looking at it closely, we feel like that this would not be confusing and that this would be our best option. And we've looked at what other rail systems have done in other cities, and this has worked out for similar reasons in other cities. We just haven't done it in Charlotte.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Bales?
Would you mind sharing with us some examples of those other cities?
So I think I would probably be best if I got back with you on that, and I'll provide that.
Anybody else? Ms. Exlin?
The last presentation I saw, I think it said, if I'm remembering correctly, that the pedestrian crossing, the goal was to open that first before the platforms, and that would be 2026.
We anticipate that the station will open for service in 2026. The construction of this station and rail trail work would begin in either late 2024 or 2025. And our intent is to build these station platforms one at a time. We would start with the one adjacent to Publix, the southern of the two station platforms. And at the conclusion of building that out, we would also have built the track crossing. At the conclusion of that, we would like to fill in the rail trail. There's a gap in the trail behind Autobell, and we would have the trail closed from Autobell behind Camden Southline Apartments and Publix. We'd open all that back up, and provided that we can satisfy our safety concerns, which we'll look at in more detail during the design, then our goal would be to have the track crossing open at that point while we're building the other station platform, sometime in 2025 or 2026.
Great, thank you. I think on behalf of everyone that needs to get through there in South Bend, the faster you could build that crossing, the better.
All right, any other questions? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the offset option as the locally preferred alternative for the South End Station.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mayor Lyles. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. And we move on to our final item, which is a MTC hybrid meeting update from our attorney, if I understand correctly.
So, Madam Chair, at the last meeting, the MTC had a discussion on how we want to move forward with our subsequent future meetings. There were some questions that were still outstanding at that time that Brad Thomas, the CAT's attorney, has done some additional research. And at this point, I'd like to turn over to Brad to provide an update to the board so that we can give you more information on that.
Thank you, John. Yeah, so if you recall last time, we talked about how the governor's order for the state of emergency had expired on August 15th, and the authority for us to have the virtual meetings had expired at that time. And so I think it's probably beneficial for us to talk about this in terms of the MTC and then the two subcommittees of the MTC, TSAC.
Let me interrupt you just to get you a microphone, because I bet the people online can't hear you.
So in terms of the MTC, our recommendation would be that we continue with the in-person meetings. I think in terms of the virtual participation, we can certainly accommodate the public to comment virtually, that we can have presentations virtually, and non-voting members could participate virtually. I think the risk is that if we do have voting members participate virtually, then in the instance of achieving a quorum or having a deciding vote, if that were challenged because of its participation virtually, then we run the risk of having that action item invalidated. And so for those reasons, we believe it would be best to stick with the in-person attendance for voting members. In terms of the two subcommittees, I'll note that TSAC and CTAG are both really advisory in their functions. They make recommendations to MTC. However, in terms of taking action, I think there's less risk for us in terms of those two subcommittees. So I think it would be possible to entertain a hybrid option for CTAG and TSAC, because I think there's less risk to consider in the event that if something was challenged and that was invalidated, it's really a recommendation. And so that action can still go forward with the board. MTC can still take action on those recommendations independent of that. So.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions on that? Do we need to take a formal action to confirm that as our policy, the recommendations we just received from our lawyer?
I don't think, unless we want to change the recommendation, I don't think there needs to be any action taken by the board.
Well, I know we certainly all want to conduct our business in a way that is above any question of its validity. So thank you for that legal advice. I certainly would hope that our legislators at the General Assembly would take note of the new technology post-COVID and develop laws that enable people who want to participate but can't be in person. But we aren't there at the moment. So thank you for that. One more thing, I'll take a moment of personal privilege before we adjourn. I just want to thank CAT's staff for pulling together, developing the YouTube and Facebook and these additional methods for the community to access our meetings. I think it is so important to make it as easy as possible for the public to access the work that we're doing and to come forward and participate and be public speakers. It's so valuable. So thank you for that work. And if there is nothing else, I will say that this meeting is adjourned. All right. Thank you so much.